watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up, a litany of broken climate promises, a dire warning from the UN after the world's scientists issued their latest report on climate change.
It is a file of shame, cataloguing the empty pledges that put us firmly on track towards an unlivable world. We are on a fast track to climate disaster.
But there is still a route to stopping that disaster, say scientists. Top of the list, stop burning fossil fuels. Nature can help us too, naturally soaking up the world's carbon emissions while improving quality of life. And heavy industry must decarbonise, say the scientists. We look at one solution which Sweden wants to export to the world. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show where we track the changes happening to our world, hear from the people being hit hardest by those changes and report on the race for solutions. So today, another stark warning from the world's climate scientists. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has issued its latest report. They say promises made by governments and corporations are not being kept. Carbon emissions keep rising, and it's nearly too late to hit the targets necessary to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and stop a climate disaster. The report says that the world's greenhouse gas emissions must peak before 2025, then reduce by 43% by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. The report says that will require huge changes across every sector, but crucially, it is still possible. The energy sector must quickly reduce its use of fossil fuels and move to electrification and improved energy efficiency. This low-carbon technology is advancing fast and costs have fallen continuously since 2010. The cost of solar has fallen by 85%. Wind power has fallen by 55%, and lithium-ion batteries used for storage and transport are now 85% cheaper, and these technologies are rolling out fast. Now, industry accounts for about a quarter of global emissions, and achieving net zero will be challenging and will require new production processes, low carbon electricity, hydrogen, and where necessary, carbon capture and storage. Nature can provide some solutions. Agriculture, forestry and other land use can provide large-scale emissions reductions and can help remove and store carbon dioxide at scale. Our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, reports.
Climate change is now happening so fast that leaving oil in the ground is no longer enough. A new assessment by scientists working for the United Nations shows we need to halve our greenhouse gas emissions in just 8 years. But we also need to find some way of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to undo the damage of the past.
We are on a fast track to climate disaster. Major cities underwater, unprecedented heat waves, terrifying storms, widespread water shortages, the extinction of 1 million species of plants and animals. And this is not fiction or exaggeration. It is what science tells us will result from our current energy policies.
Nature can be our ally, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Steert marshes in Somerset cover just 1 square mile, but they remove and store almost 18,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere every year. Scale that up, plant trees, stop peat bogs being drained, and rewilding could buy us time.
It can happen relatively quickly. We know how to do it. It takes time. Steert, took 8 years or so, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not a long time. And if we unlock these sorts of solutions at scale, we can do this within the next 5 to 10 years and buy ourselves that time to bring the technologies on stream in the longer term to reduce our emissions further.
The first attempts are being made to use technology to suck carbon dioxide out of the air and store it underground. It's expensive and inefficient for now, but the UN scientists say without it, there is little hope of reining in the rapid rise in global temperatures.
The Glasgow Climate Conference was just a small step in the right direction. Pledges to cut emissions are not the same as action, and at the moment the world is still on course for 3 degrees of warming.
The report is scathing about our continued use of fossil fuels, coal in particular. It calls for an even more rapid shift to renewables, more energy-efficient housing and a rethink of how we design cities so people need to drive less. One of the scientists says it can be done.
If we act now, if we act rapidly, if we make the big transformational changes that are necessary, there's still a glimmer of hope of getting to 1.5. And if we miss 1.5, we still stopped it going 1.6, 1.7, 1.8. So whatever effort we put in will save lives.
The report was delayed by 2 days as 195 governments wrangled over the text. The UN chief has accused them of lying over their past climate commitments, and scientists are clear on the urgent need for action. It's now or never. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Well, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said today that investing in new fossil fuels infrastructure is moral and economic madness. So how does that match up with Boris Johnson's comments? He said the UK needs to exploit more of its oil and gas because it faces a crunch caused by the war in Ukraine. Well, Alok Sharma is president of COP26 and hosted the UN climate conference in Glasgow in November.
Well, if you look at what the UK has set out, we've said that we will be producing 100% of our electricity from clean energy sources by 2035. And if you look at the transition that we've had in our electricity mix, we've gone from 40% of use of coal in 2012 to less than sort of 2% right now. And we've built the second biggest offshore wind sector in the world. And what we've been very clear about, and we set this out actually back at the end of 2020 as part of the Prime Minister's plan for a green industrial revolution, is to turbocharge an expansion of renewables, to invest in nuclear, to invest in hydrogen, and that's what we've been doing. Now, in terms of oil and gas, we've always been very clear that what we want to see is a managed transition away from hydrocarbons. But as in fact, the IPCC report, which has come out today, and the IEA's own report last year set out, that even in a 2050 net zero energy mix globally, there will still be some hydrocarbons as part of that.
But can you rule out any new investment in fossil fuels and in North Sea oil and gas production?
Well, again, we set out very clearly that we would be introducing a climate compatibility checkpoint on looking at any new licenses, and that would have to be those would have to be consistent with our own climate commitments, which is net zero enshrined in law by 2050. There was a consultation that took place, and in due course, the Business Department will set out the details of those checkpoints.
Can the UK reduce its reliance on fossil fuels at a time like this, when we're committing to ending our dependence on Russian oil and gas, and when we're facing the worst cost of living crisis since the 1950s, largely because of soaring energy prices?
Well, Anna, firstly, it's worth pointing out that actually we are not dependent on Russian hydrocarbons. Less than 4% of our gas comes from Russian sources. But of course, what we are looking to do, along with many other countries, is to wean ourselves off Russian hydrocarbons. And the reason that we are in a far better position than other countries is because we have built one of the biggest offshore wind sectors in the world. We've invested in renewables, and we're going to be doing a lot more of that. In terms of how you ensure domestic security of energy supply and you have control over prices, is to ensure that you have homegrown clean energy. And I think what you're going to see is an acceleration of that across many countries where they've understood that is how you ensure security of supply.
Well, joining me now is Co Barrett. She's a vice chair of the IPCC and has served as a lead negotiator for the US on the UN Treaty on Climate Change. So welcome to you. Thanks for joining us. The UN Secretary-General today has said that we're on a fast track to a climate disaster. So what's your conclusion? Is it possible to prevent that disaster? And is there the political will?
Well, Anna, thank you so much for having me and for showing some interest in our important report. In fact, all of the reports from this cycle. I heard the UN Secretary General's comments, and I think he's right. We are really in quite a challenging situation here. We have to make immediate and deep cuts if we have any chance of holding temperature to 1.5 degrees. But the thing about this report that I'd like to stress is that it is also full of solutions. solutions that individuals can take in their own lives at at the community level, and of course, putting pressure on governments to make the big transformational changes that are needed.
So what are the solutions? Because the task is a big one. I mean, the report sets out that we need to cut emissions nearly in half in just 8 years. So how do you do it?
Clearly, the energy sector is a place where we can make some major changes, right? Renewable energies, shift to renewables has been a tremendous opportunity already, and we can only do more there. But also, I would say 2/3 of emissions are related to cities or the services that are provided in cities. And that's a tremendous opportunity for us to make change because it's a scale at which individual action actually has impact. People can see the changes that they make in their communities and in cities. It gives us a chance to kind of work together with our neighbors to work in the places that we really care about and to make some significant action.
You talk about the shift to renewables, but the war in Ukraine has forced many countries to rethink their energy supply, haven't they? Because it's become an issue of national security at a time of already soaring energy prices. So many people feel they have no alternative but to produce more fossil fuels at a time like this. What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that is a very ripe discussion going on right now. But I would just say, you know, the near term is not the only way to look at this, the solutions to this problem. We know we have to shift to renewables and away from fossil fuels. And while we deal with crises in different ways in the near term, the long-term solutions are also really powerful and important.
And a quick word on technology to remove carbon from the air. The report says it's needed, but is there a risk that sends out the message that technology can fix this problem?
You know, I've heard that argument, Anna, and I actually think that that is not as relevant as people try to make it seem. Yes, it's true. We cannot take off any pressure from the mainstream solution to this problem, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But reducing emissions and pulling them from the air through carbon dioxide removal is a part of the solution. And it's also a way that we can do that in conjunction with reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Let's get some of the day's other climate news now. And climate campaigners Extinction Rebellion staged a protest at an oil facility near Heathrow Airport. The group blocked the entrance with bamboo structures and banners that urged the government to stop using fossil fuels. This is the fourth day of action by Extinction Rebellion and a second campaign group, Just Stop Oil, who say they'll continue to protest every day until the government stops fossil fuel investments. MPs have urged the government to set up a carbon border to prevent net zero emissions targets being undermined by cheap foreign imports. The Environmental Audit Committee said the introduction of a carbon border adjustment mechanism, pricing imports according to their carbon output, would be a powerful lever to bring down overall emissions. At present, goods produced in the UK already have a carbon pricing system, while imports, which account for more than 40% of goods consumed, are not covered. And scientists have found that by the end of this century, the chance of an extreme rainfall event in California happening within a year of wildfires will double. And researchers say increased wildfires across the western US will be more likely to result in serious flooding. That's because recently burned areas have a higher risk of mudslides and flash floods, as the soil and vegetation can't absorb as much rain or provide as much cover. Now, for hundreds of years, raging blast furnaces fed with heavily polluting coking coal have forged the steel used to build the modern world. But the process is a huge source of carbon dioxide emissions. One solution is to use green hydrogen. Now, that's hydrogen produced without emissions to replace the coal. One project in Sweden is making progress and hopes to export their technology to the world.
Instead of using coal, we want to use hydrogen. And hydrogen can do the same work to reduce iron ore. We get iron for steel production. As a byproduct, we get water vapor instead, and that can be recycled. we are still the largest CO2 emitting company in both Sweden and Finland. We stand for 10% of CO2 emission in Sweden and 7% in Finland.
Steel will be in the harder to abate sectors to decarbonize. It will take more time. Green steel that is produced by an SSAB or by other producers is at least 50% more expensive than the high carbon steel at this point in time. But the technology that has been tested by SSAB now at an initial scale is very exciting.
Do stay with us. Coming up, I'll be joined by Dame Julia King, who's on the Committee on Climate Change, and Chaitanya Kumar, Head of Green Transition at the New Economics Foundation. And we'll be discussing that crucial IPCC report. How realistic is it now that the world can stop global warming? And what can you do to help?
I'm Hannah Thomas-Peter, and I'm Sky's climate change correspondent. The UK is a world leader in wind power. Power! Power! People! It's part of the Congo Basin rainforest, which is such an important ecosystem. It's known as the lungs of Africa. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. She doesn't really enjoy speaking to the press, and it wasn't clear right up until the last moment that she was going to sit down with me.
I might be just very naive, but I do believe that change is possible, otherwise we wouldn't be climate activists.
I'm confident for the last 30 years we have known how bad it is. I'm not here to apologize, I'm here to fight for the next step.
You can see just the piles and piles of stuff, these sofas and people's desks and children's books. And you can see inside this home here, people trying to sort out their home. It's just been devastating.
I think everything's at stake. The future of our planet, the future of the beauty around us, the future of you and me.
The Ukrainian government is confirming that they are now engaged with Russian soldiers. Air raid sirens fill the airways.
In the distance, artillery rains down.
It feels very close to the centre of... There's one.
They found this devastation to their apartment.
Lots of people live here. Quite a few of the windows of the houses have been blown out by the blast.
And it feels that it's changing each day.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. And we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with Committee on Climate Change member Dame Julia King and Head of Green Transition at the New Economics Foundation, Chaitanya Kumar. So welcome to both of you. Good to see you both. So this IPCC report is a litany of broken climate promises, and investment in new fossil fuels infrastructure is moral and economic madness. So says the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. That's a searing indictment. So just how important is this report out today? Julia King, to you first of all, what do you make of the report and its significance? What does it tell us about our ability to limit the worst impacts of climate change?
Well, I think it gives us some very important messages. One of them that I took away is that we need to see 3 to 6 times more financial investment in green solutions. So really, we can't afford to be investing more in fossil fuels. It's crucial that we're directing that investment to green solutions. The other very strong message, I think, that comes through from it is urgency. We've got 3 years to turn the increase in emissions, the annual increases in emissions we're seeing, to stop that and to get those emissions declining. By 2025, we've got to stop increasing global emissions. That's a very short time. So it's positive that we can do it, but we really need to focus the finance and we really need to speed up.
Well, yes, and on that timing issue, Chaitanya, what do you make of that? Because they're saying we need to cut emissions by nearly half in just 8 years, 43%, I think it is. I mean, is that really doable, given that at the moment, globally, pledges mean that emissions are still going up by about 14% in that time frame?
I mean, it is difficult. There's no two ways about it. It's quite a feat to pull off a 40% reduction in 8 years' time. But that's what we have to do. That's the challenge that scientists have been banging on about for several years now. We've run out of excuses. We've run out of reasons for inaction. And we just have to cut carbon as quickly and as dramatically as we can. Peaking of emissions allows us some headroom because we are factoring in, the pent-up demand from the pandemic. Emissions have gone up last year. They might even go up this year. But essentially, we've got another 3 years where we have to stop increasing the amount of carbon we put in the atmosphere every year. And the context is very important because every year we put more carbon into the atmosphere, which is worsening the climate crisis and the impacts that come along with it. Your report earlier was talking about extreme heat, flooding, wildfires. All of these are increasing in severity and intensity and frequency. And they're affecting the people that are contributing the least to the problem. I think that's a key thing that the report also talks about, where the contribution to the problem and those who pay for it in terms of lives and livelihoods are different sets of people. And it really bears a point about responsibility and who owns responsibility here. And developed countries clearly own responsibility in terms of financing the transition for a lot of the countries in the global south, but also ensuring that we model the transition here.
Julia, Chaitanya says there that we're running out of excuses, and yet some would say the war in Ukraine has put new pressures on people. The soaring energy prices has put new pressures on countries. Some of them are having to turn to fossil fuels. I mean, there are short-term problems that countries are wrestling with, aren't there?
But surely the best solution to soaring energy prices is increasing energy efficiency, using less energy, which is something which is going to be fundamental to our transition. So this is the opportunity to be supporting energy efficiency, to make sure people understand what they can do to reduce their energy use.
Well, that's really interesting. How much will this come down, Chaitanya, to individuals and them changing behaviour in future? Because I think this is the first time the report does have chapters on reducing demand. Are we going to face very different futures in how we as individuals use our energy, do you think?
Most certainly. There's no doubt about it. I think it's a mix of individual action, but it shouldn't be a substitute for collective action, for government action. But when it comes to individuals, I'd say there are three things that we all could be doing. The first thing, of course, is cutting our own fossil fuel consumption. So as Julia was saying, insulating our homes, making our homes more energy efficient is the first and the most obvious, to me, way we can cut our carbon emissions. The second, I'd say, is reducing how we travel in terms of fossil fuel-based carbon-intensive ways. So reducing air travel, for example, is another way of doing it. And the third, of course, is really moving on to more healthier diets, that is away from industrial-based meat production. If we did that, then I think our personal carbon footprint could be reduced quite quickly. And when you add it all up, it really makes a difference at the global level.
So Julia, this implies pressures not just on governments and policy, but also on individuals. I mean, that's going to be quite hard, isn't it? Quite a hard sell to get people to change their behaviours and give up freedoms.
I think most people are worried about what kind of world we're going to leave to our children and our grandchildren. This is something that we know every survey shows us in the UK that people are really concerned about. And of course, last year we saw some really, really extreme weather and some really serious consequences. As close as Germany, large numbers of people killed in flooding. So I think people recognise that we have to act on this, and I think actually the fuel crisis is just the prompt we need to recognise that taking action like energy efficiency is something we have to do now. And of course, we saw a huge surge in cycling at the start of the pandemic when the roads were clear. Unfortunately, that's now disappeared again. But, we all need to get back on our bikes and walking and in my case, getting rid of those extra pounds we piled on during the lockdown.
And briefly, Chaitanya, the world scientists, climate scientists have agreed that 1.5 degrees of global warming is the kind of limit that's tolerable in terms of the future of our planet. Are we on track for it, do you think?
Well, one of the lead authors in the press release came out and said we've all but locked in the 1.5 limit, as in we're going to breach the 1.5 target, but we can pull it back, and it genuinely requires rapid collective action around the world. So the set of solutions, the suite of options we've got in front of us, there are a lot, but the window of opportunity, the window of time is closing down. OK, well, Chaitanya Kumar, Julia King, good to see you both. Thanks very much indeed for your reaction to the IPCC report. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for today, but joining me on the show tomorrow are Chief Executive of Climate Group, Helen Clarkson, and environmental activist and columnist at The Guardian, George Monbiot. Thanks for watching.